views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting groups. If you'd like to produce a show, call us at 260-421-1250.
Let me be your lighthouse so I can show you the way. Let me be your shining light, I'll keep you from drifting away. I'm the one that makes you try when...
Hello, this is Patty Hunter of Patty's Page. Welcome to my show. Today's special guest on Zoom is Senator Mike Braun. Hello, Senator. Welcome to my show.
Hey, good to be on your show.
Well, we have several questions for you today, sir.
Go ahead, I am ready.
Okay. Where were you born and raised?
That's a tough one. Jasper, Indiana, back in March of 1954. And my wife and I were both born there within about a month and a half of one another. And ended up going to school together. We're high school sweethearts. She went to college at IU. I went to Wabash College. We got married after college, lived in Boston for 2 years. And I was a finance guy and she wanted her own retail business. And her only job has been a owner of a home accessory and gift store in our downtown, Jasper. And I worked one other place for 3 years and resigned as CEO of the company I modified, basically started for 37 years. And when I ran for Senate and was elected, my new job now is taking me to DC weekly. I go back and forth, but I always look forward to going back home. I do every weekend unless I have to be here.
So basically, how long have you been in office as a senator?
I was elected in November of 2018 and got sworn in a month or so later.
And when's the next election? I hope you get in again. I know you will.
Well, I'm up for election in 2024. That's a ways off, but you're kind of always, I think, running in how you navigate your current position. And I think that's a good reflection of maybe what voters need to see if they even want you for another round. I did term limit myself to where I wouldn't run more than one more time. I believe that term limits at the federal level would solve a lot of the issues we wrestle with, where people get too comfortable out here, forgot what they campaigned on. And I think the results speak for themselves at the federal level.
That's good. That's very good. What are some of the basic recent issues are you covering, looking after, or trying to change?
Yep. Well, I've been here a little over 2 years and got here. The government was shut down for about 5 or 6 weeks. Back then, the high cost of healthcare would have been probably the number one issue. That, along with immigration and the economy, were the three that were most discussed when I ran for Senate. The economy was doing real well pre-COVID. And then almost within a year, we had impeachment. We had COVID that we've dealt with, and it's still not out of the picture. And it was bookended by a second impeachment. So a lot of the other underlying issues didn't get addressed. In that time, I've been a conservationist, somebody that's always been interested in, loved Mother Nature, and have kind of led the Republican response to engaging on the climate issue, which means small government. We can't afford to borrow a ton of money like we do generally on anything here. Have a different point of view of how you address it mostly be engaged in the conversation, have something other than no as our response to the issues of the day.
So with the Equality Act bill, that seems to be the big honcho right now. One of them anyways.
Yeah. I think the Equality Act, I think the Voting Rights Act, HR 1, SR 1, where there's being an attempt to maybe federalize elections. The Equality Act, I think those would be two that would have to muster the filibuster. You'd have to get 10 Republicans on board. I think it'll be the temptation to maybe throw the filibuster out the door. And if that happens, I think you could see a cascade of a lot of other legislation come forward. But the Equality Act, which has got especially places like Indiana scratching its head in terms of what that would mean practically for businesses, for schools, it's one I think that would have a robust discussion.
What is the Equality Act for some people who don't know?
Well, I think by its name, it would be talking about what it should embed. And that's, of course, the idea that we all believe in, equal opportunity. And I think it goes a long way towards equity of results. And of course, when it has some of the more controversial provisions to where you've got transgender individuals, wanting to compete in athletics outside their biological gender, that's going to cause a really, I think, critical discussion. If anything, these ought to be litigated at the state level before the feds get involved to see what might make sense, across the country. That's what the bill has, to me, a kind of beguiling title to it, because it goes much further than equal opportunity.
That sounds confusing, really.
I think it does sound confusing. And I think once it would get to be a serious discussion, you're going to find that in places like Indiana, there's not going to be the support for something like that you might find in California or New York.
California, I can see. We lived there
Yep.
for a while. Different. Like two different countries,
Well, sometimes it feels like that in terms of how we live, as the Hatfields and McCoys on many of these big issues. I think there ought to be a few things that we all agree on. We ought to be an inclusive country. We ought to always push for equal opportunity. We need to find ways to avoid involving the federal government, because it generally makes things more complicated, more expensive. Let the states play out as the laboratory of what might make sense. And I think the one thing taxpayers are getting frustrated with is we can't keep spending so much money through government, because at the federal level, we're borrowing every penny of it. And your viewers need to know that even our normal operating budget, which is driven by the high cost of Medicare, Social Security, going bust in the trust fund, that we run $1 trillion deficits annually just in our normal operating budget. And we are more indebted now as a country than we were coming out of World War II. And we paid off every penny back then, and there's no chance of that occurring currently. That to me is frightening for my kids and my kids' kids.
Well, what about the people who are getting pension, like Medicare, Medicaid, supplements? What about them? If they have an operation, or as they get older, they have to have replacement, be bionic, so to speak?
Well, I mean, the elderly obviously depend on Medicare. And I think most Republicans and Democrats agree that along with defending the country, maybe shoring up our infrastructure and making sure entitlements are sound for future generations, no one has the political will to address entitlements, so it will be there. and we just choose to keep borrowing from future generations to backfill into these. And there's no way that can last in the long run.
Another issue I'm concerned about is gun control. What can we do about that? I mean, what are they doing?
Well, I'm an avid defender of our Second Amendment. I'm also a big believer that we should do whatever it takes to keep guns, any weapon, out of the hands of criminals, number one. Need to do a better job of that in places like Chicago, for instance, where the crime that occurs there on a normal basis dwarfs all these tragic situations that we see happen far too often. And then the mentally ill, we need to have a better system to keep them from getting weapons. The red flag law that's been in place in Indiana needs to maybe be tweaked, because there is that law and they went part of the way there, and then the prosecutor chose not to go the extra step or two. So we may need to tighten it up. But so often the discussion gets on radical change that's not going to impact either the mentally ill or especially the criminal. It'll impact law-abiding citizens. Chicago ought to figure out how to enforce the gun laws that are in place that are much more restrictive than many other places that haven't worked.
Like, I'm bipolar type 2. I would never get a gun. I'm on meds, I got normal life. But there are other people who are not on meds we have to worry about. It's not their fault that they're mentally ill, it's the chemical imbalance of the brain. But still, we have to screen, like you say, and make sure the right people, whether we take away the guns or keep the guns, it's criminals are always going to find a gun somehow, one way or the other.
I think that's what we got to work on better, is how to zero in on that.
Gangs and all that.
Yep.
For this gender problem, people turning from one sex to the other, especially the children, are being centered out. Parents. What do you think?
I think that whole discussion of gender identity is one that's obviously a real issue. And for the individuals that grapple with it, it's something that is serious. And I think that my point of view on anything like that is, even if you maybe disagree with some of the results of it, like especially when it comes to sports, you never demonize anybody that disagrees with you. That same issue on the sanctity of life. There are two very different opinions on abortion. And I'm an avid defender of the sanctity of life. Came up in the debates when I ran for senator. And to me, the best answer to that was agree to disagree. Don't demonize the individual with the other point of view.
Right.
Give respect to discuss it to where you might find a better place. And there's not a lot more that you can do in any of those issues that are that divisive.
Are you going to be passing any bills, like to stop anything like the present government is putting through that we don't need?
So anything that you're seeing from the White House, President Biden, and the Democratic Congress, sadly, we can't do anything. That was the consequence of losing those two Georgia Senate seats. Had we just kept one of them, it would have been different. So we are largely along for the ride here. And I think the main issue for them is, how much are you going to push, even breaching the filibuster? How much will the American public put up with? That gives us the opportunity to maybe do a better job of selling our point of view in 2022. I think I got maybe time for one more, because I got to get down to the Senate to vote. So
I ask you, what would you like to say to my audience to encourage them even though we're in a different, underneath a different government and the rules, how can
Yep.
we stay staunch and not give up?
Well, your audience, which would mostly be Hoosiers,
Mhm.
thank goodness you live in a sane state like Indiana that you call home, the towns within which you live. That's my peace of mind when I see that what we're wrestling with out here. And we as a party of conservatives, as Republicans, have to do a better job of selling faith, family, and community, how it's going to work for a broader audience, and have good ways of articulating that. Otherwise, if you take any indication from recent national elections, we're going to be on the curbside. So the optimism is that always appreciate where you come from. We come from a good place. We got to do a little better job of getting our point of view communicated on the national scene. I intend to do that.
Well, good luck on the next election, which is several years down the line.
Yep.
We are so happy that you are in our government, our own minor, what do you call it?
Junior senator from Indiana.
You betcha.
That's what I am. So, but I'm going to take the time that I'm here to be aggressive defender of Hoosier values. And any of your audience listening, you can reach me probably more easily than any other senator. As I travel the state, I've offered any Hoosier on a Friday to come visit me in Jasper. We take up to an hour to talk about whatever you want to.
Is that online as well when you're in Jasper?
You can get a hold of me online or by phone call or Zoom if you reach out to my office and discuss any issue. And we'll do that as we have time as well.
Thank you, sir.
Take care. Enjoyed the conversation.
This is Patty Hunter, Patty's Page, saying good afternoon. I'll see you next week, and thank you, Senator Mike Braun,
You bet.
for being on my show. Thank you.
I rise in proud support of legislation that will break down barriers for those with medically determined ALS. ALS is a progressive and fatal neurodegenerative disease that affects the motor nerve cells in the brain and spinal cord, gradually robbing patients of the ability to speak, eat, and eventually breathe. Currently, there are no meaningful treatments, no known cause, and no cure. But today we have reason to hope. Since 2016, Senators Whitehouse and Cotton have championed the ALS Disability Insurance Access Act. Thanks to their tireless efforts, we're about to give ALS patients and their families more timely access to their Social Security disability benefits. No longer will these patients have to wait 5 months to access benefits they've earned. Passing this act will help alleviate some of the financial burdens that accompany an ALS diagnosis and will allow patients and their families to focus their precious time where it needs to be with their loved ones in their battle against the disease. ALS is not a rare disease. More than 5,600 individuals in the U.S. are diagnosed each year, meaning 15 Americans are diagnosed each day. Not only is ALS common, it is also extremely personal to many in this chamber, and it's personal to me. My cousin Ann Seitz lost her battle with ALS on Thanksgiving Day 10 years ago. Her husband, Terry Seitz, currently resides in my hometown and is my state director of outreach. My budget and appropriations staffer, Robert Ordway, and his sister Jennifer lost their father, Douglas Raymond Ordway, to the disease. Kathy Lesh, a member of my Indianapolis team, has a son, Brian, that was diagnosed with ALS this summer. Brian also lost his father, has fortunately been enrolled in a clinical trial. We are all praying for his treatments to be effective. It shows you just in the network of people I've come to know back home and here in the Senate, how many lives are affected by it. Countless patients in the Hoosier State. I'd like to personally thank Tina Ketzel, the executive director of the Indiana ALS Association for bringing this bill to the attention of our office. I'd also like to give a heartfelt thank you to Corey Poland of Brownsburg, Indiana, for his passionate and unwavering advocacy in support of the bill. Corey has become a friend to our office and has also been a champion of legislation I introduced, the Promising Pathway Act, which would provide new FDA authority to more rapidly approve specifically diseases like this. And I'd be remiss if I did not thank I Am ALS, especially Brian Wallach, Danielle Carnival, and Dan Tate for their unyielding devotion to this and to fixing our broken healthcare system. Today, we come one step closer to accomplishing this pursuit. It has been a great honor to co-found the first ever Senate ALS caucus with my colleague across the aisle, Senator Chris Coons from Delaware. Passage of the ALS Disability Insurance Act has been a priority for this caucus since its inception about a year ago. We readily acknowledge the bill's passage is long overdue, and there's much more work to be done. We look forward to rolling up our sleeves and coming together to advance policies in the future that will continue to improve the quality of life for ALS patients. In doing so, we celebrate ALS patients, those we have lost, those who are currently fighting this dreadful disease, and those whose journeys have not yet begun. It is a disease which does not have the luxury of a large community to raise awareness and fight for reforms. ALS has no survivor community. It is up to us then to speak up for those who can no longer speak and to stand up for those who can no longer stand. To those that we have lost to ALS and to those currently battling this disease, Ann Seitz, who's lost her life, Douglas Raymond Ordway, Brian Lesh, Corey Poland, Brian Wallach, Dan Tate, and so many others impacted by ALS, we here in the U.S. Senate are your advocates. I yield the floor.
From Indiana.
Came here to support my colleagues, mostly, and to actually listen to see if you'd hear an objection to a bill like this. For the short time I've been here, what a rude awakening to what can happen. Everything you heard here makes sense, and I just ask citizens across this country, Hoosiers, weigh in. Let your senator know that this is a step too far. When something like this occurs in this chamber, when it's crystallized so simply, and you are either for or against infanticide, never imagined I'd be seeing this early in my tenure here. I ask folks across this country, make your voices heard, because this is a tragedy that this happened. I yield. Thank you.
Godspeed, my love, until we meet again. You're always in my heart and every dream. Don't let this time apart give in to all our fears. God will keep us close from up above. So until we meet again, Godspeed, my love. God is with us always, for the rest of our lives.